Good morning. So before we start, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, we are now, theoretically, we're streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and the other Facebook page for Living Water. So if somebody's watching us, we'd like to welcome you from being online. I know there's been some people that have watched from week to week. I want to say one quick word. If you have a mind to, you are able to donate to this worthy cause at church@addis.com and then click on the giving link and find Living Waters. Now you should know there was back in the day when I was a little kid, they had a tent revival in Denham Springs, and it was a rocker. And I remember sitting there, and we walked in the back just to kind of watch. We were really more observing than we were participating. But the gentleman said, "I don't want your ones, I don't want your fives, I want your 10s and 20s. Well, we'd be just perfectly happy with 1s and 5s. It's a cheerful giver that we're looking for, and it doesn't have to be any set amount. In fact, it doesn't have to be anything if you're not inclined to give, don't. But you should know that one of the reasons that we meet in a school is because, or in this location, is because we're not paying, our expenses are very low. And that allows us to use our money for things like people who need surgery, students who need help. The church doesn't pay any salaries. So this is really just a ministry of where we're trying to reach out to people and do what we can for them. So if you are of a mind, and only if you are of a mind, church@addis.com, or I believe that's the website, but then you can click on the giving link, and then you'll find Living Waters Church. Make sure you go to that, or it won't get to us. And if we got it, we appreciate it. We're going to use it for some good stuff. So, first of all, Daniel, there is a lot going on, and most of the time the story is almost romanticized, right? Daniel gets off and he gets treated bad, but then he kind of wins in the end. But you can imagine this because the first siege, and we're going to talk about the history of it in just a second, but the first siege was when Daniel was taken by Nebuchadnezzar back to Babylon. There were actually 2 sieges, but you can imagine something like this. You're in the city of Jerusalem, and you see this massive dust cloud starting to gather on the horizon. And if you listen closely, you can hear horses, and you can hear all the noises that would come with an army that is going to siege a city. And of course, they did. And Jerusalem might have been a little bit full of themselves because they had taken on the Assyrians, and that was one of the kingdoms that was surrounding them. And Assyria was big and Jerusalem was little, and they kind of held their own, and it was kind of like Judah's okay. But it didn't really work out. One of the reasons it didn't work out was because of the kings of Jerusalem or Judah. You know, back in Judges, the Israelites complained, we want a king. And they were told, you got a king. You got the king. Why do you want a king? We want a king. Careful what you ask for. So the last 3 kings, and this was when Daniel was there. The names aren't important, but it's Jehoiachin, which was the son of Jehoiakim, and then there was Zedekiah. Jehoiakim, the first one, he reigned for 11 years. Rabbinical literature refers to him as a godless tyrant. He was not, when it says he did evil in God's eyes, and that's what it'll say a lot of times in Judges as you read through these guys. He was a not so nice fellow. He had incest with his mother, incest with his daughter-in-law, and incest with his stepmother. He was an equal opportunity incestuous person. It didn't really matter, right? He had a nasty habit of killing men, and then he would violate their wives and stealing their property. This was what God would consider evil in God's eyes, right? He lasted for 11 years. He was as part of this deal with Nebuchadnezzar coming in and kind of sacking the city, sieging it the first time, taking Daniel and some of his people, he's gone. So there's Jehoiachin, that was his son. He lasted 3 months. He was only about 18 or 20 years old. He was the one who was taken out in the first siege. Daniel was hauled off along with several thousand of the best military, royalty, and craftsmen. This is what people don't think of. They didn't just go there and pluck Daniel and a few of his friends out. They took the best of the best. They took the best craftsmen. They took the best military. They took the royalty. In other words, they wanted to make sure that Jerusalem was brain drained and talent drained, because they had been conquered. And then there was a king right after that, so he only lasted 3 months. There was another king. All of these guys were considered evil. Zedekiah lasted for 11 years. He was handpicked by Nebuchadnezzar. You're going to be my man. He got fired up and decided that he was going to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar, and that resulted in the second siege. And that second siege was when the destruction of the temple occurred. And the Jews who were there were dispersed into all, they were scattered. This was catastrophic. Jeremiah was a counselor to Zedekiah, the prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah had warned, and you don't need to keep doing this. So this is what it says. The last 11 years, he took about 10,000 people out of the best and the brightest out of the course of the two conflicts. Now, we're going to read what Jeremiah said, but first we're going to look at Isaiah 39, because Isaiah 39 was also a warning. Isaiah said, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up to this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, and some of your own sons who will come from you shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." It's very possible that Daniel was a eunuch. There's another thing that might ruin your weekend. So there was this strict warning. Babylon is going to capture your people, take them off, take the royalty away, and make them eunuchs. You say, well, what's fair about this? I mean, what's fair about Daniel suffering for the stupidity of these kings? And that's where we get the most jacked up. That's not, I'm suffering because of someone else. And that's not right. That's not Christian. What kind of God would do that? And it's the same God who sent his son Christ, because he didn't do anything wrong. And he suffered on our behalf. It's the pot calling the kettle black. That's not fair. Well, be careful, because that is the source of your salvation. So there's this tension that goes on between people suffering for events that they had nothing to do with. Collateral damage. So one of the things that we can see is this, is that, just to bring it to our day and time, if America is going to prosper, and I don't mean this nationally, I mean, let's say, if we're going to have an awakening, like we've seen on some of the college campuses, like we've seen in some of the revivals that have and are taking place, like we see with the 150, 175,000 people that showed up for the March for Life and did so peacefully. If that's going to become our culture rather than chaos, and so it's going to occur one person at a time. The Christian faith does not rely upon coercion. It does not rely upon presuming authority or pushing authority on someone else. It relies on the voluntary belief that there's a better way to do this, There's a better way that I have found and experienced, and there's a better way that I should live by. Clearly, the people of Jerusalem at that time, in Daniel's time, were being led by folks who didn't believe this at all. The more people that tune into God's will individually, the more the country is attuned to God's will. We're so far divided. We have factions on both sides, the extreme right and the extreme left, that hold such radical what's the word? It can't be touched. Their positions are simply, this is the way things are, and I don't want it to change. I will not give up my beliefs. I was watching some YouTubes, and there's some Messianic Jews that are technically, they were born Jewish, but they've also accepted Christ. They were speaking to other Jews who were not Messianic Jews. They were there's several videos. First, one of the things that's remarkable is many of the people that are in Jerusalem that call themselves Jews right now are very, very secular. Many of the ones that would call themselves Orthodox are very, very ingrained. In other words, I've got a position and I'm not willing to listen to another to see whether I should change it. And one of the interesting things is they would read he would read Isaiah 53 to them, the entire chapter. Is that Old Testament or New Testament? Must be New Testament. No, that's Old Testament. Isaiah 9, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. New Testament. The point being is that if you don't, how do you explain the prophecy, just Isaiah 53? How do you explain Psalm 2? How do you explain Psalm 22? How do you explain Zechariah 12, where it says, the nation will mourn for the one that they have pierced? We'll cut that off now. And there were people wrestling with that, and some said, I need to study this more. But more often than not, the response was, that disagrees with my belief system. It causes conflict. Therefore, I'm not going to consider this much further because it's going to cause me to conflict in what I actually might think. We were talking in service this morning, and a gentleman had been on a podcast, and he had a very famous athlete over to his house who happens to be Muslim. And the athlete's wife has converted to Christianity. He said, yeah, I'll come to your house and I'll hear what you got to say. And he listened to all of that, and then he basically said, well, this makes a lot of sense, but I prefer to be Muslim. It's like, wow. So you're saying that truth is not as important as your own personal prejudices. And that's a dangerous place to be, but we have to be careful that we don't fall into the same trap. So, Daniel's country was attacked from outside. Some of the very foundations of our country are now being attacked more so from the inside. We're struggling with the idea of what is truth. We're struggling with the idea of what's a woman. We're struggling with the idea of, is it a baby or is it a clump of cells? These are such fundamental driving issues that it's very hard to find compromise. Indeed, I don't know that you can. I think probably the solution to this, if there is a solution, is one person at a time begins to see that there is a better way and then adapts that way. But it's important to recognize this. The things that were done to Daniel did not shake his faith. Now, he was under the old covenant, not the new covenant. So he was, all of the sacrifices, all of the things that were expected, that was going to be something that he was doing pretty religiously, if you forgive the pun. But we've got really a strange theology right now. And Babylon brought a strange theology, the many gods, all this other kind of stuff. But the Babylons were also very good at mathematics. The 7-day week is courtesy of the Babylonians, as is the 60-second minute and the 60-minute hour. Very, very astute mathematics. And this had to do with, strangely enough, had to do mostly with astronomy, but also astrology. There was this, they caught the regular order of things, and so they set these time frames up. And then what they would do is when they came in and they took Daniel, they said, we're going to teach you what we know, and what we know you are now supposed to forget what you've learned. Well, Daniel would have been taught from a very early age that man is made in the image of God, and man is expected to behave in such a way that recognizes that. Zedekiah, when he was deposed, one of the things that they did was they hauled him out to the public square and killed his kids in front of him, which was bad enough. Then they poked his eyes out, blinded him. Then they put him in chains, brought him back to Babylon, where he died in prison. This was a way of saying, in effect, our God is greater than your God. So this strange theology walks into Israel and begins to threaten it. But ironically, the threat was already there from within. A king that was having sex with his mother, his daughter-in-law, and his stepmom. I mean, this is depravity of the worst kind. So there were threats from within, threats from without. Well, when you get that kind of situation, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to make it. And then indeed they fail. But what this has to do with us is, what do we do when the threats come from without or the threats come from within? Because the church is a threat to itself sometimes. Just check the schisms that have developed within the Methodist Church, the Catholic Church, indeed any church. The Methodists have now split into different groups over what would be the definition of marriage, amongst other things. But that was one of the fundamental defining lines where the traditional said, we know what marriage is, and we know how God defined marriage, but the threat comes from within, and so here we go with a split. The threat can also come from without, where the non-believer tries to impose things on the believer that the believer says that's simply unacceptable. This is a very true statement. Next time that somebody tells you that something is true, say to them, what kind of evidence is there for that? And if they don't give you a good answer, think carefully before you believe a word they say. If somebody can't tell you a reasonable why, and Lord have mercy on us all, if you look at social media, they hardly ever give a why. They just give a what, and now believe the what because so-and-so said the what. People hear what they want to hear, and then, particularly in the church, and they find someone that says it to satisfy their itching ear rather than check the Bible as the ultimate source and see, are we being true to Scripture? No, maybe not. Now, I'm not talking about denominations that differ on the periphery of stuff, and so they've created a denomination. But when you get down to the fundamental issues, was Christ alive? Was Christ crucified? Did Christ resurrect? I mean, this is places where the flag has to be planted. And what are the implications of that? How did Christ teach us to live? And are we modeling that teaching? Because this is what the threat from without looks like. This was made by the same guy. His name is Richard Dawkins. He said the first statement, and he also said this one. The second statement sounds a lot different than the first, because I think the first one I'd agree with. If you can't give a good answer for what it is, then I would say I need to be careful about believing you. But here we go. I think the case can be made that faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate. Faith, being belief that isn't based on evidence, is the principal vice of any religion. Now, what he just did was, you should ask, why do you make that statement? Because the ultimate thing that's said there is this belief that isn't based on evidence. And we've talked about that time and time and time again. That's not faith. The idea that I hold on to something that I hope is true, but I have no way of determining whether it is true or not, is absurd. The resurrection in history is a very provable, not in the technical sense, but it is certainly the weight of evidence shifts much more towards this is a testimony to a real event as opposed to this was all made up. And we've had that conversation time and again. If it were so easy to debunk, guess what would have happened in 2,000 years? It would be debunked. It would be on the trash heap of history, thrown away. But in fact, there's a more robust conversations now, leading historians to actually say the explanatory power of the resurrection is the best reason we have to suggest that it happened. We don't have enough time or space to go into that right now, but it's enough to say this. If you get accused of believing that your belief is a blind faith, and you respond to that, you are being held victim to the very thing it says. Don't believe the next word they say, because the premise of the whole thing is wrong. No part of the biblical view includes the expectation that things should be believed when there is no evidence. What did Jesus tell Thomas? Check it out. See for yourself. All of the people saw Jesus die. They know he was dead. They know where he was buried. All of his enemies knew where he was. It would have been very, very easy to put the whole thing to bed. Just put the body in a cart and go down the middle of the street and saying, who? Who are you worshiping? Because there's the carts. That didn't happen. It would have been very easy for people to just simply say, well, they all hallucinated. But that gets kind of hard when there were 10 occurrences over 40 days, at least 10, one of them to about 500 people. There's no such thing as a hallucination that everybody doesn't take the same drug. You can't hallucinate a mass. That doesn't happen. Hallucination is an individual thing. So you start, well, maybe they just made it up it was just a lie that was made up later. Oh, that sounds great. What kind of benefits do you get for being a Christian? Oh, well, you get martyred, you get split in two, you get crucified, you get upside down, you get stoned, you get beheaded. This is great. Sign me up. Where do I play? I mean, but they never renounced their faith. And Daniel never tracked back from his faith either, because he was having to live his values in the middle of a world that insisted those values had to be changed. And he knew why he believed. He did exactly what Dawkins said. He wasn't just willing to compromise. There were certain places where his flag was planted and he said, here I stand, I'm not going any further. Today, unfortunately, most of our church Christians are not educated enough to understand why they believe. And so they, for whatever reason, they kind of murder the fundamentals. And they turn Christ into, well, I prayed and got a Cadillac, so that means there's a God. No, that means there's a Cadillac dealership. That's what that means. Well, I just believe. I just feel it. Well, maybe that's heartburn. And so for the person that stays at that level, and we all begin at that level, but the person who stays at that level, that's adequate for salvation. I believe you can have saving faith to be of such a low level of information that it's not useful for much of anything except salvation, which is extremely useful. But you cannot enter the battle. You can't be a Daniel when Babylon comes and remain the person that ultimately brought down a king. You will get sucked up into now Daniel, you go read our books, and Daniel, you go be who we want you to be, and you'll go, well, that's probably okay. So when they took Daniel to another land, first of all, his parents, goodbye. You'll never see them again. They've also probably surgically altered him by castration to where he would never be the same. Maybe that's not positive, but many scholars feel that. What did he have with him? The thing that he brought with him was the knowledge that was not removable regardless of the circumstance. He kept that knowledge. He kept the knowledge that Jeremiah kept telling Zedekiah about. Don't do this, because he was in the royalty. He was probably plugged into that sort of thing. Don't play with immoral pagan practices. Separate for yourself from the idolatrous nations. That's an individual call now, not so much a national call. This is what Jeremiah, in just a couple of things, Jeremiah 6, run away from Jerusalem, blow the war trumpet in the town of Tekoa, raise the warning flags over the town of Beth Hakerem. Jeremiah 2, destruction is near, Jerusalem, I will destroy you. Ye who are fragile and gentle, get ready to fight against Jerusalem. Flee for safety, people of Benjamin. Flee from Jerusalem. Raise the signal over Beth Hakerem, for disaster looms out of the north. Guess where Babylon was? From the north. Even terrible destruction I will destroy, daughter Zion, Israel. So beautiful and delicate. Shepherds with their flocks will come against her. They will pitch their tents around her, each tending his own portion. That must have been nice. Sitting there watching people, because why were they bringing all of these flocks? They had to feed their army. You're sitting there watching, and you're starving to death, and they're sitting there with their lambs out there, hungry. That's what he's talking about. Prepare for battle against her. Arise, let us attack at noon. The daylight is fading, and the shadows of evening grow long. So let us attack at night and destroy her fortresses. It took about 40 years before that actually happened. It's not like they weren't warned. Today, America, the church, you, me, we're surrounded by immoral practices and pagan idolatries. This can't be, you can sugarcoat it, but you can't ignore it. It is the level of godlessness that some people are so proud to display is truly radical. And we're called to separate from that, but we're also called to interact with that in such a way that people who are on the fence, that population in Israel where the Messianic Jew is talking to these people, there's a population that says, that's interesting. Can we talk more? There's also a population that you could literally, Jesus could walk on water in front of them, and I believe they would say, but you made a wake. I mean, you say, well, that's ridiculous. Really? Lazarus comes out of the tomb, and what was it? What did the detractors say? I got to get back to the leaders. We got to kill this guy, or he's going to get too popular. Now, how do you deal with evidence like that? What does that suggest about your willingness to completely ignore evidence because of what I believe? That's probably the most the most damning, if you will, indictment of our willingness to not accept truth. Inconsistent behavior on the part of Christians devalues the Christian faith and causes people to mock it. You say you're a Christian, you live like a heathen. You say you're a Christian, but you're having sex with your daughter-in-law. This being the old covenant, but the analogy still stands. You do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it, and then when you get in trouble, who do you come to? Oh, God. Help me, God. So here's a good question. What if Daniel responded differently? What if in the middle of all of that stuff he went, whew, I'm out of this. Too much heat. The book of Daniel would be markedly different. What if Christ, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, says, Father, take this cup from me, because if you don't take it, I'm going to give it to you, because I'm not doing this. What if the beliefs that supposedly drive our behavior are challenged and we find out they're not really our beliefs? That's the $64 question. And that's the tough times, but what we have to kind of guard against is when these things occur, oh my gosh. And it's a simple little deal. This was another YouTube. Guy was on the streets at Mardi Gras. A fellow walks up to him. He says, oh, I'm a Christian. Yes, I believe. But we don't need you telling us that stuff today. That's convenient Christianity. What are your office hours? Well, I'm a Christian from 8 to 4, Monday to Friday. Saturday, Sunday, and after hours, all bets are off. Right? That's an office hours Christian. I don't need you talking about that stuff today. We don't want to hear that stuff today. Oh. Wow. Here's something to think about. The sins of the Christian are just as resented as the sins of the pagan. Your sin is just as detestable to God as any other believer or non-believer. What's the difference? There's two categories of people in the world. Number one, those people who sin and they're judged for it. Number two, those people who sin, but God chooses not to remember their sin nor count it against them. Those are the two categories of people. Either you sin and it's counted against you, or you sin and it's not counted against you, and you're not being held accountable for it. Now, if you're offered that deal, most thinking people would do what? I'll take the latter. But in order to take the latter, there's an admission, like Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live, I'm God and you're not. Well, it has to be reversed. You're God and I'm not. That is so repulsive to some people that they would rather totally reject and then justify it with some of these arguments. I'll use another example. We were talking this morning. This is consensus within science today, that the beginning of the universe, all the matter that you see, the hundreds of thousands of galaxies, which contain millions of stars and so forth, that began from an initial condition where everything that you see today in the universe began from a space that was smaller than a fraction of the size of a proton. That is agreed upon. Now think about that. And then, so just run that back a little bit further. If you get beyond the size of a proton, you get to, or beyond that little fraction, you get to nothing. Now, us Christians, we've kind of understood this for a long time. We call that creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. Robert Jastrow, famous NASA astronomer, he understood it as well. He said, for the scientists, it ends like a bad dream. We've scaled the highest peaks. We've climbed the highest mountains. We've sought out the deepest truths. And when we got to the top of the mountain, we were met by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Now, how much faith does it take to believe that everything in the universe has originated from a space the size of the fraction of a proton, and say, yeah, but God didn't do that? Now, who's got faith? And there's been this relentless effort to try and somehow scrub God out of the picture. But God is like disappearing ink in National Treasure. You put a little lemon juice and you add some heat to and lo and behold, there's something there. God will not be erased. Science will not erase God. This is one of the things and this is happening in our schools, and this is in a Catholic school, and it's well intended. But in the conversation, the students were asked this: how do you reconcile your faith with science? Now, what does that implicate? The presumption is what? Faith is somehow non-science. Science is somehow because, and it's like, no, that's not faith at all. And we've said that a million times. Faith is, the fact is, as Paul taught it, the resurrection is a fact. That wasn't taught as a could have been, might have happened, we think it happened. Paul said, if there is no resurrection, then we above all are to be what? Pitied. You fools, eat, drink, and be merry, because guess what happens tomorrow? You die. And so there was no equivocation of, well, maybe it was a resurrection. That was a fact. That was taught as a historical fact. That was understood as a historical fact by Paul, by the early apostles, and even till today. Although I don't think today that many people take it with the same weight that because Paul said to live is Christ, to die is gain. If you're going to cut my head off, then what can you do to me? Where, O death, is your sting? Where is your victory? If that's the best you got, then you got nothing, because that's death is not the end. So as we look at that and we start to try and figure what is the faith? And the faith is not in the crucifixion. The faith is that what Jesus did right there individually with the help of God, raised from the dead in an imperishable body. The faith is that if that happened over there, then it can happen for me too. There's the faith. But it's faith based on what? Evidence. It's not blind faith. But we talk about faith in the church. It's so out of bounds. You know, Daniel had faith, but he was made a eunuch. Daniel had faith, but he was taken away from his parents. And that's kind of important, because basically what it says is that sin creates collateral damage. You can drive drunk and you can hit the church boy who has done absolutely nothing to deserve what happened. But he suffered the consequences. And so this notion of sin creates collateral damage, that's something that Daniel was, due to the collective idolatry of the country, he suffered personally. He suffered harm. And people love to quote this verse. For I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Read the rest of it. Just read the rest of it, because that was written to a people in exile. And he's trying to tell these people who are in their darkest hour, who are doing their jelly roll, he's trying to tell these people, hang on. There's hope to be had, because the rest of it says, then you will call on me and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Oh, I thought I could just kind of go, well, but why come I'm not prospering? I will be found by you, and I will bring you back from captivity. They were in exile when that was written. I will gather you from the nations and places where I banished you. You were dispersed, and I'm going to bring you back to your own country. And I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Good grief. When a Christian reads that and then they talk about, well, it's got to be coming, right? Because God's got plans to prosper me. Stop it. Just stop it. It can't. When somebody tells you that, so why do you believe? Well, because that's what Jeremiah says. No, that's part of what Jeremiah says. Woo. Jesus was kind of similar. This collateral damage. Jesus prepared his people for collateral damage. He said this, I've told you this so that you will not fall away. John 16. They will put you out of the synagogue. Not they might. They will put you out of the synagogue. In fact, the time is coming when anyone who kills you will think they are offering a service to God. I'm doing the right thing. And there's your Daniel moment in the middle of Babylon. He also told them about this business about, I have plans not to harm you. And Jesus added a little bit more context to that. What does he mean by harm? Now, I think he means this. Do not be afraid of the one who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. So there's some truths there. First of all, it says, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body. Yeah, there's people who can destroy your body, but the question is, what about your soul? Or not to spare a soul for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are numbered, so don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Does that sound like a guarantee of, I have no plans to, you will not be harmed. You will always, no, it doesn't sound anything like that. It says you need to be prepared to be kicked out of the synagogue, for people to kill you and think that's the right thing to do. If you treat Christianity like Jeremiah 29, that short verse, without reading the rest of Jeremiah, where it says why that was stated, you will come up with such a corrupted view of Christianity, an unreal view of Christianity, that you will turn away. When your Daniel moment comes, you'll go, I'm siding up with the Babylonians. Me and Nebuchadnezzar, we're thick. It's everywhere in the New Testament. 1 Peter says it this way: who's going to harm you if you're eager to do good? And you say, nobody. Read the rest of it. But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. So who's going to harm you if you are good? Knuckleheads, pea-brains, people that are outside of the faith, who are convinced that what they are doing is good. Yeah, this is right, isn't it? Because they're so ignorant of biblical truth. They're so divorced from being in a relationship with God that they call evil good and good evil. And you're going to run into that, he says. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ, you can't go have sex with your daughter-in-law. Newsflash. You can't have sex with your stepmom. Newsflash. That got his eyes poked out. But the guy that did it, he's going, I didn't do none of that. Yeah, but you're going to come with us, Daniel, because what's about to happen, you're about to be collateral damage in that. And this is what this is saying. Those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ, what do they see? Fruit. They see Daniel in a Babylon world. They say, that looks different. Don't look like the world. Be a part of the world, but don't be stuck in the, if you're walking in a cow in a pasture full of cow patties, be careful where you step. That's what it's saying. For it is better if it is God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Well, now, God, I know that I have plans that are never going to harm you. Shoot, no. Well, by the way, you're blessed. It's better to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. By the way, what does that imply? When you do evil, what are you going to eventually do? Suffer. It's coming one way or the other. Another line from National Treasure, when the dude who found the stuff, he's sitting in the church and he's sitting with the other guy, I can't think of their names, Nicolas Cage, I can't remember the other guy's name. But he says, am I going to jail? And he says, somebody's got to go to jail. Somebody's going to jail. Justice is coming. There's two groups. Justice is coming. There's one group where you're going to be judged for your actions. And they're going to be presented in front of you and you will be judged. The others, which there's maybe just as many actions, but there's going to be no judgment in the sense of condemnation, because those acts God has chosen not to remember. God has chosen not to hold those against you. That's better. I think that's what it's talking about. It's better to suffer for doing good than for doing evil, because you'll suffer good when? This world. When will you suffer evil? That could last a while. Christ suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. If you're put to death in the body, if you die from cancer, from whatever, you are made alive in the spirit. The body's dead, the spirit is made alive. Where, O death, is your sting? And then 1 Peter 4, because he was talking to people who were about to take, as a junior high kid told me one time, you having a good day? No, sir, I was monkey stoned. That's a graphic picture, isn't it? Monkey stoned. Well, Peter's talking to some folks that are about to be monkey stoned. And he says this, dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Where are your plans to prosper me? But rejoice, inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rest on you. If you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or a thief or any kind of criminal, or even as a meddler. In other words, when you suffer, it shouldn't be for something stupid that you did. And he goes so far as to say, a meddler, which of course no Christian has ever committed the act of meddling. No. Every church, I think, could probably put this on their sign. First Baptist Church, ... of meddlers. Second United Methodist Church, ... of meddlers. I mean, and we won't even go to gossipers, but you get the point. If you get stuck, if you have to suffer, suffer for the right reasons. If you suffer as a Christian, praise God that you bear that name. Oh, are you proud of the name? Or is it kind of I don't like to say it, you know. I don't want to talk about that today. Today's Mardi Gras. Party. We'll talk about Christ tomorrow. I'm off the clock. It's 5:01.
Super Bowl Sunday.
It's 5:01. I ain't on the clock until 8 o'clock again tomorrow. Let the games begin. It's time for judgment to begin with God's household. Oh, Isn't that odd? That he would actually expect the people that call themselves by his name actually expect something out of the people that do so. If it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who do not obey the gospel of God? Well, there's your two-party system again. Some of us are covered and our sins are not counted against us. Some of us aren't so lucky. So here's the conclusion. Daniel learned how to manipulate Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to see that as we move through it. Manipulate is not a bad word. Manipulate simply means Daniel learned how to be true to his ideals in the middle of a Babylon world. We manipulate. Everything we do is essentially a manipulation. I want to go to Burger King. I want to go to McDonald's. Well, let's decide, okay, well, we're going to go to Burger King. That's a manipulation. We have changed what we were going to be, but the process behind the manipulation isn't because I'm trying to stick you with something or hurt you. It's I want to bring you to a better place. You know, everybody's real familiar with the story. They brought in the Hershey's Kisses and the chitlins and cracklins, and they brought in all the food that the Babylonians like to eat, which and it was like, that's good stuff. But can I just have can I have my oatmeal? Would that be okay? Because I prefer not to eat that. He learned how to manipulate. The world around us right now, we are in Babylon. I don't mean to say that in such a, this wildly crazy, hyperbolic way. But Babylon is here. It's alive and well. The forces that are beginning to demarcate between good and evil I can't imagine where it could be any clearer. If you think about it, Daniel had a lot in common with Job. Boy, had some bad stuff happen to him, but he never cursed God. In fact, he relied on God. Job had a lot of bad stuff happen to him, but he never cursed God. He relied on God. And the stuff that happened to him, Job was a righteous man. Daniel was a righteous man. Oh. We've got to get past this business about whatever's happening to me is because God is unfair. And we got to get to this point where we go, if God expects this from the church, and Lord have mercy for those that are outside the church. Or as Peter said, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? Because if judgment is to begin with God's household, and if it begins with us, we got to quit playing church. I'm not on the clock. When you leave here, you are in church. There's church out there. This is worship. But the field is where you actually become Daniel. And Babylon surrounds you. And that you have to kind of keep that front and center. Otherwise, it's Mardi Gras, dude. Not today. Don't talk that stuff today. And that's what weakens us, weakens the church, and grieves God. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Maybe to just challenge ourselves to just go, oh man, this is some deep stuff. This is heavy. And the fact of the matter is, I am measured and found short so many times. But the call to be a Daniel in a world of Babylon is still there. To maintain the principles, to seek you first, to understand that times that there will be people who will do really bad things to us, thinking that they've done the right thing. To always be prepared to give a reason for our hope through our good behavior, to where we separate from the world. The Daniels don't look like the Babylons. May the church not look like the Babylon of today. Give us strength to do that. Give us enthusiasm to do that. Most of all, give us resolve to do that. It's in your Son's name. And everyone said,